So we can take two questions. Varun and anybody else? Yes, so let's do Varun. Yeah.
JP, as you were talking, I found myself wondering about that institution right over there across the street, the IMF, and how it would fit in if it were three cases and not two, right? The IMF is certainly more focused than WTO. The stakes are probably higher. Involves more people, arguably, in the sense of that it really affects the global economy. So then one would expect it, according to this story, to be more deliberatively inclusive than the WTO, but I haven't done the empirical work, but prima facie, I don't think that's necessarily the case. So how do you accommodate that? And you know, I was just thinking about how I would think about that, and you know, just a hypothesis, a simple story would be, you know, the political theorist Will Kimlichka says that politics is always politics in the vernacular. He's very skeptical about international organizations because there is no Esperanto or something, you know, that we all speak in international organizations. And so the WTO is about widgets. Everybody relates to that. You know, UNESCO is about Claude Lévi-Strauss. Fewer people relate to that. And the IMF is about, you know, collateralized debt obligations and derivatives, and even fewer people relate to that. That explains the differences in deliberative quality.
Yeah, I don't want to go across the street. I want to go down rather than going up here. One of the most exciting things in Peru right now is our regional trade committees and organizations that are set up in each of the regions of Peru that go to the small producer, the medium-sized producer, micro producer, women, indigenous people, to try to get export decisions that are made. And there's a strong push because of another organization called MESA and a national ministry to get these trade groups as a new kind of deliberative body that would result in decentralization and more opportunity, more employment regionally. Is there a possibility that the WTO could see this? A lot of countries around the world are trying to decentralize in a way that benefits local people. The WTO could play a role as a top-down facilitator of this kind of activity.
Thanks. Actually, Jenny, you had your hand up. Do you want to say something?
This is very quick. At one point you said that a small country might, in the good incarnation of WTO, as it's getting bigger and more inclusive, a small country might say, cotton is very important to us, and that matters. And I wonder how it matters. One way it could matter is people could actually change their intellectual constructs. They came in complete laissez-faire, and they go out sort of laissez-faire with contingencies. You know, they actually change the intellectual apparatus with which they think about the world. Another way is that they could bring to bear norms. They could say, oh yeah, the poor countries are getting really hurt here. You know, that goes against my norms of justice. We should do something for the poor countries. And another is that the poor countries could just make trouble. This would be not a deliberative, but a power issue. And the WTO could kind of realize that it's you know, in a slightly edgy place, and if these poor countries really pulled out, consolidated, talked with one another, and acted as a coordinated group and didn't support the WTO, that might make real trouble for the WTO. So they'd better throw them a couple of bones, and they'll throw them some protection for cotton or whatever it might be. So in those three, so I'd just kind of like you to address, when you say it's sort of more deliberative, do you have any sense of?
One more question from Sheena.
Just to tell JP that I enjoyed the paper, and to put on the table the phenomenon of Davos man, including women, sorry. You know, these people who are floating around the world purporting to tackle the great issues of our time. And when you add to that, as part of Davos man and woman, philanthrocapitalism, you know, Bill Gates, what's his new best pal, you know, what's his name? Buffett, and now they're going around the world and encouraging billionaires to put money down. We're about to create a force that will overwhelm the World Bank, WTO, all these institutions that you're analyzing. So I would encourage you that keep doing this work, and as you develop it, it would be nice to have a paper on Davos Man and philanthrocapitalism and global deliberation.
Okay, JP, 5 minutes.
5 minutes. Well, thank you first of all for especially the two discussants and the 4 questions I got asked. And if other people have questions which might help me think this through further, I totally welcome engagements even after these 5 minutes. But thank you for some very thoughtful comments there. I'm actually going to use Jenny's comment there as a takeoff. My reflexive position in this, and this might speak to Shina's concern too, is that the philanthrocapitalists and the great powers are not going to do anything for the developing world. Out of my frustration with what the developed world really provides the developing world came one of the papers that I'm citing in this paper, that the developed world likes to come up with a lot of moral largesse, this rhetoric of help, and the Doha development agenda. And yet, even in the Doha development agenda, the few concessions that the developing world was able to extract were not through appeal to justice norms, not through appeals to some greater norms, but because they fought hard on the floor. They got public health declarations because they thwarted the agenda, and they said, we're not going to let this move forward on intellectual property until African Union, Brazil, India, AIDS action lobbies in the United States, etc., said, that's it, we're not going to let this move forward unless you have a Doha public health declaration. On the cotton issue, United States did not cave in to Brazil, even after it lost a dispute at the WTO. Now we are, in effect, providing $4 billion worth of subsidies to our cotton farmers in the United States and $700 million worth of subsidies to cotton farmers in Brazil. So that we can play this, and none of the justice arguments have failed. So I'm a little skeptic, perhaps you will share this with me, of global norms of justice trickling down. Margaret Herman has done this research on how Americans really care about justice, and therefore in experimental design they would be willing to provide concessions to the developing world if they really felt the other side was very poor. I don't see that at the WTO. What I see is Jeffrey Sachs yelling at Dambisa Moyo because she dared to assert that stop giving us aid. People get very angry when they're removed from the positions of victimization and they stand up for themselves. And it's those people who are standing up for themselves in these places which are not so deliberative, which lack transparency, which lack credibility, that I want to talk about. And where do these things make a difference? What voice you went to it, Arkan. What voice do they have to speak with to make a difference? And even when they do, does it make a difference? And to me, the conclusions are muddled. The fact is we got the Public Health Declaration. You know, the fact is the United States does have some shame now of telling the C4 countries we won't give you concessions in cotton, and telling Brazil we won't honor this judgment. Well, they honored it in the sense that they worked out through arbitration that they'll give them $700 million worth of subsidies. So it's a very incremental sort of a process. If there is some notion of absolute justice which could be applied here, I don't know what to do with it. That's why I sort of left it out, because I just want to see what is the discursive notion of justice coming out here. What are the countries which are being allowed into these spaces? How are they saying it? What are they saying? And that's where I have some grounds for optimism in terms of where they're able to say it. The reason the WTO to me is more deliberative than IMF is because despite the media scrutiny, etc., it still remains a very arcane matter. People's passions don't get embroiled in it, so we don't take to the streets that much. We have taken to the streets. The structural adjustment policies have resulted in riots and have resulted in social movements, but still the level of scrutiny with global financial matters is just not where the level of scrutiny of trade matters has been. This is not to celebrate trade, but to say that if we are going to get deliberative arguments out of international organizations, these kind of conditions would have to hold. I just finished a book on UNESCO, and the last chapter, in a way, actually, I came back to Hoggart's conclusion. He's very cynical about UNESCO, but comes out celebrating it for some of the arguments that you're getting at. What kinds of reasons? You know, because there is something really appealing about UNESCO. But for me, if UNESCO is going to get it right, then, you know, streamline your agenda. Don't try to do everything and all of the above. Be aware of, you know, and at some level they are, and that's what it would take in that space to be able to do it. Now on experts, Celeste, I couldn't agree with you more. I'm not arguing against experts. I'm saying only experts. You know, the reason that experts' policies don't trickle down is because they don't engage. No, so you need expertise and engagement. I teach a class on culture and development, which to me is the logical counterpart of it, because that's situated at the local level. And to wish that interventions didn't take place in society would be just completely wrong. The World Bank is just another form of intervention. People are used to interventions in their lives. The question is, what kind of intervention? You're talking about those technological interventions. Why is that people take, they buy into Ushahidi, but they may not have bought into another type of a technological intervention. Say the wooden loom when it was introduced in Indian cooperatives. They didn't take hold of that. That was something totally alien, but Ushahidi somehow, maybe it's the way of intervening that might be a task. And that's where I think the WTO, in terms of ground-up type of interventions versus the top-down interventions where they meet together, is where you do get a trade policy which reflects comparative advantage, because the people whose advantage it's supposed to be were involved in defining some of those advantages. In the cases that you mentioned on the unpacked countries, and also when the US did its bilaterals, Peru and Colombia and all of these countries, they had these cuarto junto processes. They brought the NGOs and they brought the trade people with them. So with the result that the so-called Putnam two-level process was happening simultaneously. But this is the first time countries from Latin America were negotiating like this and going into the rooms with the United States and saying, we can't do this because we got these NGOs in the next room. Who are not going to let us get away with it. And that was a process that was introduced by the WTO and, by the way, financed by the US. They would rather have people who came knowing what their interests are than the minister who is not connected with the people on the ground. So that's kind of where I try to put it all together.